Hello, welcome back to the Sunday Serving channel, a place to come for a gospel message of hope, of challenge, something to make us stop and think how we should live our lives according to Jesus' teachings. And of course, right now, I think the whole world is pausing and thinking and mourning, really, the scale of violence and warfare happening in the Middle East, in Israel, the absolute tragedy of what, the barbarity of what happened when the terrorists came across from Gaza and just butchered innocent people in their sleep, and the outrage, the suffering. Think of the families who've lost loved ones, the ones that were captured and taken as hostages. It's just hard to imagine the scale of pain and suffering of the people of Israel. The first passage that came to my mind was, where it says we should rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. We have to pause and weep with anyone that's suffering. Of course, now as the war escalates up and Israel capitulates and starts bombing in Gaza, there's an amazing amount of suffering there. We've got to think of the innocent civilians, the women and the children on that side that are suffering for the atrocities that the Hamas took out on the Jewish people of Israel. Where does this all come from, and how will it end? And it's not up to me or to you to tell governments what to do. It's very understandable. You have to protect your people. Wars have been fought for centuries. There's no human way that this bloodshed, this violence will stop. But what does Jesus say about this, and how should we as Christians respond? There's a quite clear message in the Bible. Well, let's first look that up from, I think it's Romans 12. So that's a letter from Paul. It says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep." So if you look at that passage in Romans, which we'll read later, I think he was referring back to Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, which is Mathew chapter 5. And of course, one of the Beatitudes, verse 9, is, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Blessed are the peacemakers. What is it to be a peacemaker? We can pray for peace, we can long for peace, but what really is a peacemaker? How do you make peace? Do you make it by force? Do you make it by bombing someone or people that have done bad? How is that going to make peace? There's a cycle of violence that only escalates and builds. Jesus taught how to make peace, and that is through love of the enemy, through forgiveness. It's a very difficult teaching, but I think it's the only one that truly brings peace. So here we go on, later on in chapter 5 of Matthew, here's Jesus teaching about being a peacemaker. He says, "You've heard it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." That's a pretty amazing teaching, right? I mean, kind of goes against human nature. If an insult, someone does something bad to us, we want to get back. We want to revenge. We want to, at the very least, just maybe treat them the same. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was actually in the law of Moses, and that was actually to limit retribution to what is just, right? Only do as much to your enemy as they have done to you, as opposed to doing more. If they come and kill one person of your family, don't go back and kill 2, just kill 1, right? But Jesus had a different way, saying, no. Don't resist an evil person. Turn the other cheek. If they take something, you give them something else. That's quite a way to handle it, but what does it do? What does that do to our enemy? think about that policy of if we could really follow Jesus' teaching, how would that change the world? And he goes on here, you've heard it was said, you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. So that's Jesus' teaching about how we should deal with violence. It's a difficult one. We can't point our fingers and tell other people, you need to do this, right? All we can do is start with ourselves and say, how can we do this in our lives, maybe in our families? Let's start there, where maybe it's not as costly, hopefully no one's coming at us with a knife or a gun. We can have other kinds of enemies just by bitterness, envy, dislike. And if we try to apply this in those smaller situations at home, in our workplaces, in our families, in our friend circles, maybe some miracles will happen. And we'll learn this is a good way to deal with solving problems and fights and disputes. And maybe by extension, and that might extend to bigger situations, maybe even to countries and international politics, who knows? If we have enough love, enough faith, it is possible. This does work. So going back to that word from Romans, let's read that, what Paul says in his letter. He says, starting at verse 14, chapter 12, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. So today, of course, we're weeping with all those who are suffering in Israel, and also all those who are suffering in Gaza, and anywhere in the world really where there's violence, where there's bloodshed. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one with evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, and I will repay, says the Lord. So again, at the end of time, if there is an injustice done, if someone is acting evilly out of hatred, governments and we can exact a price of justice, but in the end, God will repay. It says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, though, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. Or if he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That hits at the heart of this message. It's heaping coals on someone's head, our enemy's head, if we do what's unexpected, if we counter hatred with love, if we counter bitterness with forgiveness. We're heaping burning coals on the head. That's what's going to change a heart. And we have to believe that the power of good, the power of love, the power of God is so much greater than the power of evil, of hatred, of violence, of revenge. Good is so much stronger than evil. Good will win. God has already won. In the end, he will set everything right. He will wipe away every tear. He will bring justice where it is needed. We have to believe that. And we can start today by being determined to have this attitude in our own lives. So as hard as that is, let's try it. It works. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.